Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions.
That cover's so awesome.
This is Mr. Chris Claremont, a legend.
Melanie goes,
Tired.
how's it going, all you Minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And join me today for my overview of these Milestone Compendiums from DC Comics. So, join me. And welcome back, everybody. Now, before getting started, I want to thank all my viewers that suggested that I talk about the Milestone line. I've done an overview of the first compendium when it first came out, but my viewers wanted me to do, so some of you all, an overview of volumes 2 and 3. And I couldn't think of a better week to do it than the week celebrating the birthday of Dwayne McDuffie, one of the co-founders of the Milestone universe. He was born on February 20th of 1962, and he passed away on February 21st of 2011. 49 years old, way too young. And some of you all may be familiar with his name because of his work in comics, like the Milestone universe, or some of his run on Justice League, or the Damage Control, and a bunch of Marvel and DC work. Or some of you may know his name from the animation world, like the Justice League Unlimited series, or his last work that he did, I believe, was the Tower of Doom. Or no, Tower of Babel. It was called Justice League Doom, was the animated movie. But for a guy that lived only to be 49 years old, he did so much for the comic book industry. And I couldn't think of a better way to honor him than talk about one of his most proudest creations. So we're going to be taking a look at each of these 3 compendiums. So you have Compendium 1, 2, and 3, the DC logo, the Milestone logo up there. And then different characters. You have Static there, Icon and Rocket and Hardware, and the backs of each of the books. Each of these compendiums retailing for $59.99. So we're going to crack each of these open, talk about some of the stories collected in here, give you a history of the Milestone universe, and then of course talk about the build. So let's kick it off with compendium number 1 here. Okay, this is the one that I've done an overview of already. And I assume I did my job right by telling you a little bit about the stories collected in here, showing off the artwork. So I'll spend less time on this one. This one here collects the Blood Syndicate 1 through 12, Hardware 1 through 12, Icon 1 through 10, Static 1 through 8, the Zombie issues 0 through 11, which I find the most interesting. I may have said that in my first original overview, and the Shadow Cabinet number 0. The book has 1,320 pages. And what I want to do is just quickly talk about how the Milestone universe came about. So, a group of 5 creators, including Christopher Priest, and people like Dennis Cohen, and Michael Davis, and Derry T. Dingle, and, of course, the legendary Dwayne McDuffie, got together, and they felt like the minority groups in comics were underrepresented. As far as American comics, not just with the big 2 companies, but also new companies that have been coming out of the woodwork. Like you had Image Comics, you had Dark Horse Comics, you had Caliber Press. You had a lot of different companies, and they felt like the minority groups were severely underrepresented. So they thought, why don't we make our own company and start writing and drawing about characters that look like us? And that's how all of this got started. That idea came about in 1993. And even though the Milestone universe, or I guess the Codaverse, or Milestone Comics, they were all published by DC Comics. But they didn't fall under the DC label, so editorial really couldn't control their stories. So you're going to see a lot more violence in here, a lot more mature themes, some sexual content, and of course, vulgarity. Although it's funny because sometimes the vulgarity is censored, but then in other comics it isn't. They just straight up drop the F-bombs in here. So that is the beginning of the Milestone universe. Christopher Priest ended up not staying with the group, so it just kind of became the 4 gentlemen working on each and every one of these series. Dwayne McDuffie writing a majority of this. Dennis Cohen, of course, drawing a lot of these issues. Now, it's not just them. Later on, they expanded. They started getting a lot more different writers and a lot more different artists to come in. What started off with the main four expanded quickly to people like Matt Wayne, who would come on and do the Blood Syndicate storylines. There's also people who you're going to see through these pages, not just in this volume, but you have John Paul Leon, Chris Sotomayor, and Chris Cross, like some of their early work, Tommy Lee Edwards, Humberto Ramos, J.H. Williams III, Jamal Igle, and Robert Washington III. Just names like that, names like Eric Battle, names that you are probably familiar with now. They all started here in the Milestone universe. So this is its own little universe, and I say little, I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but it's different than the DC universe. This is called the Dakotaverse, and the Dakotaverse is pretty much this city. It's a Midwest city in just Dakota, and this is where the Big Bang happened, and a lot of these characters got their power because of the Big Bang, and I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get to Volume 2. But I just wanted to showcase some of the artwork in here, MD Bright doing some of the stuff in here, and the book that I wanted to talk about in this volume, because it's just so interesting that they decided to collect it in here, is this book called Zombie. And this is by John Rusum and drawn by J.J. Birch. And I say that this is the most interesting one because Zombie was a comic that appeared in the second year of the Milestone universe, but it's collected in the first Milestone Compendium. Like 0 through 11, a big chunk of this compendium is Zombie, but it's not collected in volumes 2 and 3. Who knows, it might be collected in volume 4. But this is really quick, the story of this Korean-American scientist named David Kim, who's experimenting on different types of ways of regeneration on your skin and your limbs, kind of like Dr. Kurt Connors, the lizard. And then he gets this ability to absorb limbs and body parts, and that's pretty much the story, and how he is betrayed and how eventually he is fighting crime using these particular powers. It's a very weird comic book, but Zombie went all the way up until like I think issue 23, maybe it was 22 issues, so there is enough for more Zombie to come back later on. Just feel like it's interesting that we've got like year 1994 to 1995 of Zombie collected in the first compendium. So let's move on to Compendium 2 and talk about these characters. So here's Compendium 2 with a brand new cover right there by Dennis Cohen. And this is the Worlds Collide storyline. I was so excited about this volume. So in here you have Blood Syndicate 13 through 23, Hardware 13 through 21, Icon 11 through 21, Static 9 through 20, Shadow Cabinet 1 through 4. Now it's an ongoing series. Superboy 6 through 7, Superman, Man of Steel 35 through 36, Steel 6 and 7, and Worlds Collide number 1. Just the one shot, 1,320 pages. Now, I mentioned that there are different characters. This is all new different characters for this particular universe. And the one that kicked it off was this character named Hardware. But let's actually talk about, man, do I love John Paul Leon's art here. We do have a new artist that comes in because John Paul Leon ends up going and leaving the book and does I think he ends up joining the Shadow Cabinet. But for the most part, earlier on, it is John Paul Leon. So let's talk about Static first. So Static is probably the most recognizable character. He's a 15-year-old kid. Virgil Hawkins is his name. And he got his powers from the Big Bang. And you're going to be seeing that a lot through here. The Big Bang, like that particular name and what it means. It is later revealed exactly how the Big Bang was able to give people powers. This is Icon. By the way, you have guest writing Kurt Busiek and Ron Wilson from the fame of The Thing and his fame in the Power Man series, the Luke Cage series. And this is a really cute story. But most people look at Icon and think, okay, he's just a Superman ripoff type of character. But he's a lot more than that. He's a little more complicated as far as his background. He does come from space, but instead of landing in 1939, he landed in 1839. And he ends up landing in it was like a cotton field. So he doesn't look like this. That's just the way that his body transformed to look like an African American male. Oh, this character right here is so awesome. Speaking, I mentioned Luke Cage a little bit earlier, but this is Buckwild Mercenary Man, who, yes, is your take on Power Man and characters like Black Lightning. He becomes really important later on. But anyway, back to Icon. So Icon mimics the first sentient life form, an African American male, and becomes this character that has been around for well over 100 years. And what he does is he kind of pretends to be his own son, because he never ages. So he goes from Augustus Freeman, and I think by the time you're reading these stories in here, he's Augustus Freeman the fourth. And he's teamed up with a young lady. She was a thief, but she inherited some of the powers from his spaceship because he crash landed here. And she goes by the name of Rocket. Now, later on, you're going to see a different Rocket and a different Icon. But not yet, not yet. Hardware was the very first comic book that was put out by Milestone. And Hardware, again, is another one of these books that's written by Dwayne McDuffie. Here you're going to see some early artwork by Humberto Ramos. And it is the character of Curtis Metcalf. And Curtis is kind of like your Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark character. Very smart, always into machinery, and eventually makes his own armor to fight crime. And that's exactly what the character of Hardware is. The most interesting one out of here, okay, Zombie's kind of weird. I'll admit, Zombie is really weird. It's a weird comic book. But one of the most interesting group comics is this Blood Syndicate. And Blood Syndicate is just a group of characters that got turned into superpowered beings because they were all caught up during this Big Bang. They all got put on Paris Island, and the cops hosed them down with like this gas, and the gas had a side effect and turned them into superpowered people. But the gas didn't affect everybody that way. Some people died, and it's just awful, man. Like I didn't expect an origin story to be like this, but you do have different type of characters here. I really enjoy the characters that are in the Syndicate. And I do have to talk about Worlds Collide. But the Syndicate has characters like DMZ and Fade and Flashback and Boogeyman and Brickhouse, Aquamaria, and there's a character named Holocaust and what is her name? Kwai? I thought it was Kawaii. And Masquerade and Tech Nine and Third Rail and Y Sun. And there's another character, Dog. Dog ends up joining later on. But it's just that type of group that you have here. And I'll talk a little bit more about them here in a second. But let's talk about this Worlds Collide event. What the heck is this? Alright, so I mentioned that for the first time, this is being collected in a collection. It's never been collected in Superman trade paperbacks or in Omnis. It's never been collected in anything. So Worlds Collide is a crossover between the Milestone universe, set in its own universe outside of DC, and the DC universe, but really Superman titles from the DC universe. And there is a one-shot explaining things happening through here, what's going on. But pretty much, it's all about this 33-year-old mailman named Fred Benston, who, when he goes to sleep one night, he wakes up in the Dakotaverse. Then he does his job, he goes back to sleep, and then he wakes up in Metropolis and does his job and goes to sleep. It's like he's living in these two worlds, and this rift, which that will come into play later on, becomes so apparent that these worlds are colliding, and both worlds cannot exist, so one of them has to go. And that's what this big crossover is. So for the first time, Superman gets to meet characters like Icon, and they see a lot of similarities between each other. It's also really cool to see artists like John Bogdanove or Tom Grumet draw these Milestone characters. I thought that was a really nice treat. There is the one shot in here, and you can find out exactly how it ends. Now, towards the end of this compendium, Volume 2, it's one of my favorite stories that I've never read because the Milestone universe, to me, I was getting some of those issues. I was getting issue 1s, and then it was impossible to find the rest of them because my comic book store in Kentucky, or actually anywhere around me, just didn't carry it. But I would go back and try to get single issues, and then, when the company went under and everything just, they had to cancel every line, you could find the comics pretty cheap. So I did start reading some of those stories, but I had never read the Icon stories, and this one is freaking awesome too, this DMZ. There's a lot of good stories in here. But Icon, remember that I said he came from space? Well, at the end of Compendium 2, something happens. Like, Rocket's life is changing because something happened in the first compendium. She finds out in the second compendium it's starting to change, that she herself has to take a break from being Rocket. So what's going to happen? And Icon decides, I'm done. My mission here on Earth is done once everything is revealed about the Big Bang. So what does that mean? Remember when I said there's going to be another Icon and another Rocket? Yeah, DMZ has an awesome freaking story. I love this story. It is so dark. It goes places that I didn't expect it to go. It's heartbreaking, but it shows, what happens to some of these people that are just innocent bystanders. And sometimes the Blood Syndicates has these one-shots just featuring one character or two. In the back of this particular volume, you're going to see more of these profiles. Right here, this one is Hardware. A lot of the artwork in here from Dennis Cohen. And Hardware, Cohen was always changing his armor. That's one thing I love. This is the, I think, Worlds Collide #1, where you can peel the stickers and just put them wherever you want. And then the bio on the creators. Let's look at the newly released Volume 3. So, Volume 3. This one collects Death Wish 1 through 4. And that is a character that spun out of the Hardware issues that was in, you can find those in Compendium Volume 1. Blood Syndicate 24 through 27, Hardware 22 through 28, Icon 22 through 27, Static 21 through 25, and Shadow Cabinet 5 through 13, and then the new series, Cobalt 1 through 14, 1,208 pages. And again, no zombie back in this one. So each one of these compendiums has a wonderful table of contents because the page numbers are found at the bottom. And we continue these particular stories of these, I want to say, these characters, the way that they're written, the way that each of these particular series were written, don't really intertwine with each other that much. You are going to have characters that show up in the Blood Syndicate. You're going to have characters show up in Cobalt. But at first, Cobalt's doing his own thing, and I actually like that story. It's weird, but I dig it. This is the new series, or I guess semi-new series. This is a Shadow Cabinet. And Shadow Cabinet is full of people like Iron Butterfly, and Sideshow, and Dharma, and, what is her name? Is it Donner, that's right, and Blitzen, that's right, because I was like, I know they're like deer names. As a matter of fact, they're almost right on the nose. And there's twists and turns in this particular group story. This is when you pretty much realize that, oh my gosh, the Milestone universe is a lot bigger than just Dakota City. There are other superheroes that are outside of Dakota. Humberto Ramos now becoming the ongoing artist on Hardware, and really digging his art here. This is stuff I've never read because I didn't really see Humberto Ramos's artwork until he was drawing Impulse, which happened right after he was doing this book. Cobalt. Cobalt is such a unique, weird book, and I dig it. This is a series I never read. And their Uncanny Omar Talk Pretty One Day, the first 14 issues are collected in here. So Cobalt is Dakota's city's vigilante. This is by John Rosum and Arvell Jones. So he is known as Dakota City's vigilante. He's kind of like a one-man army, does a lot of the things on his own, doesn't really need anybody. You don't really know much about the character. But what happens towards the end of issue number 1 and the beginning of issue number 2 is that he gets a sidekick. So even though we don't really know who he is as a reader, we don't know what he's about, we don't really know a lot of things about him, he's kind of a man of mystery. Immediately he gets a sidekick. This is was it Keith or Kevin Page, I think? But his dad, Richard Page, that's his name. His dad asked Cobalt to go and let him train him to be a superhero because he's getting tired of him getting picked on. So he becomes a sidekick, and his sidekick's name is Page, but it's not given to him by Cobalt. And Cobalt still goes on these deathly missions and taking this kid with him. It's ridiculous. But I love the idea of him trying to train Rick to become a superhero. Even though he reluctantly does it at first, he's just impressed by how good his efforts are. And he tries to discourage him from becoming a superhero, but to no avail. And later on, you do find out more about the character of Cobalt. But those first few issues just had me laughing my ass off. Okay, this is one of the most strangest miniseries right here. This is Death Wish. And like I said, Death Wish spun out of the Hardware ongoing series. And I kind of want to keep it as a surprise for people that haven't read it. This was my first time reading it, and I kept thinking to myself, wow, this is 1994. They were doing a lot of progressive things back then. For every type of minority. That's crazy to think about. Just how way ahead of their time they were in the Milestone universe telling stories like that. But I'd rather people be surprised and find out on their own. But the other story I wanted to talk about is the story of Icon. It's after the... Although, I do really enjoy these issues of Static. Static is quickly growing up. Like, for a 15-year-old, you know, he's becoming more interested in girls and having problems at school and just going through all those things adolescents go through. By the way, this is the cover. I may have mentioned this in my first overview, but this is the one cover that DC was like, no, you need to censor that. We don't like sex on our covers. And so Milestone just trimmed it down. The original idea for the cover was this right here. And because of the condoms that are on the floor, it was suggesting sex, and DC was like, we don't do that on our covers. So they fought it tooth and nail, and in the end, you know, they decided to, okay, fine. We'll put a little heart around there. But I really like the character of Dawn. His relationship with Dawn, and because she's a superhero and he is too. And this is when Static shows up in Cobalt. And Paige does end up getting a new name. And there's a lot of innocence between that Dawn and the character of Static. I like that. It kind of reminded me of those early days of like Invincible or even Ultimate Spider-Man in a way. All right, so I wanted to talk about Icon. So remember when I said in the second volume, he's like, my mission here is done. I'm going to be flying out to space. And I also said that the young lady that plays Rocket during this time, she can't keep going on as Rocket for reasons that I won't say. You can find out for yourself why she can't do it anymore. But she did have a replacement for herself. She does find somebody that can replace her being Rocket. And that is this young lady named Darnice. And Darnice is Raquel. Raquel's the original Rocket. That's her best friend, and she becomes the new Rocket. But then who's going to be Icon? Remember that one guy, that Buck Wild mercenary man? Rufus T. Wild is going to be Icon. While Icon just left and went back to his home planet. But are they going to be able to do it when this new villain named Oblivion shows up? How can they fool the world into thinking that that is the Icon and the new Rocket when Oblivion is just wiping the floor with everybody? Well, you can find out for yourself all the way in the back. We only have this extra right here. This is the Static extra. the cover, and then the bios again. Now, as far as the build of these are all soft covers, of course, and glued binding, and so no eye. The paper stock they're using here is this really thin, almost like satin type of paper, kind of like what they used in the Epic collections, but not as thick, because when you have a book that's over 1,200 pages. Now, I've read all 3 of my volumes. I've only read them one time, so I'm just kind of giving you my opinion on these. The problem when you have books like this, of course, unless you're being really careful, but I like reading. I like reading, holding them up. I like reading, putting them flat on the table, is that eventually you're going to get creases. There's no way to avoid it. I don't care how hard you tried. Like, there's going to be creases on your books. The important thing to me, at least, is there's no crease down the middle yet. And I've put these through the ringer, man. I've read these like this. I was sitting down like this, and yeah, still no crease. So these are built better than they used to be. I like that. Gives it some sense of durability, and because you're paying $60 for 1,200 pages, and it's the only way, like 95% of these stories are collected, I think, you know, they need to last you a while. So, yeah, they have passed the test. I don't know, you know, how many read-throughs you can do with these, but for the money and the amount of pages you get here, I think they're well worth it. I think Dwayne would be happy. I think he would have been happier with a hardcover collection, but I think it's important to carry his legacy on, and the legacy of these characters and the wonderful creators behind the scenes. And that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing any of these books, don't forget to check out our sponsors. BD Cosmos, the Canadian leader in graphic novels. They have a physical storefront in Montreal, Quebec, and their website, bdcosmos.com, offers 25% off your order of over $99 or more, and free shipping everywhere in Canada for every order of $200 or more.
Their shipping care is exceptional. Your books will stay cozy through the rough Canadian weather and arrive to you in near mint condition.
After checkout, let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way, and you'll be added to the monthly $25 gift card raffle. Entries are valid for new and returning customers.
Don't be afraid to call or email them. Ask them questions. Their staff is always happy to help guide you towards the right purchase. Visit their website, bdcosmos.com, for more. BD Cosmos, with rewards and raffles taking care of customers in Canada. Eh?
CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and build of each of these compendiums. Let me know in the comments down below if you're a fan of the Milestone universe, or if this is your first time reading the Milestone universe, you've never read any of these particular stories before. And if you hope that the line finishes out, and maybe one day they get collected in a hardcover format. If you have any questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Everyone, stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.